I am so pleased to be joined right now by the president of the Young America's Foundation. You might remember him as the governor of Wisconsin. That would be Governor Scott Walker. Governor Walker, thank you for being here.
Oh, Michael, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Governor, I cannot tell you how excited I am. One, that you're now running Young America's Foundation. Very exciting. I love doing events with YAF. Been doing it for years now. It's one of my favorite things we do. But I'm even more excited about this little document here, this action plan called The Long Game. I want to get into what the long game means. I'm just excited to see those words because I feel that too often conservatives have the short game and they focus all of their attention on the short game, and what happens? We lose the culture and we lose the politics, and we lose all of our sort of cherished institutions in the long run because the left has a much longer political vision. So tell me about how we're going to win in the long game.
Well, we are. I'm a huge optimist. I came of age under Ronald Reagan, so it's appropriate to be associated with YF, considering they're owning and operating the Reagan Ranch, amongst other things. But it's part of the reason why I'm a conservative and more importantly, an optimist. But for us, it really is about the long game. We looked at this and we said, America's under siege. We see it for years. We've warned about it in our college campuses, but increasingly we see it in our culture. We see it in our communications with the censorship from big tech. And as you just alluded to, the left has really been at this for quite some time. They've literally been working on this for decades, right back to the 1960s. So it's not going to be just a news cycle or even a presidential cycle. It does take the long game with a series of things. I'll give you a good example. We think we can have, right now, we're the largest conservative student organization in the country. We support students on about 2,000 campuses across the nation, but there's 4,000. There's 4,000 public and private colleges and universities in this country. We got to be on all of them. So in the long game, we're going to be on all of them. We're going to have a presence there. We're going to support students there. We know that we've got to do that. Even if it doesn't happen tomorrow, over the next few years, as part of our long game plan, that's exactly just one of the many things we've got outlined.
Could I volunteer to go speak at the University of Hawaii? Is that I don't know if someone's signed up for that one yet.
About February 6th on Reagan's birthday.
That would be great. Yeah, exactly. I think that would be terrific.
Well, and it fits. Another one of our points is to have speakers in all 50 states representing campuses big and small alike. So Hawaii would be one of those.
Right. This is great.
And maybe Alaska in the summer. You got it all covered.
Yeah, that's really quite beautiful. Nice. Obviously, YAF has been around for quite a bit of time. Founded in Bill Buckley's living room in Sharon, Connecticut. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And as conservatives, we don't just want to go back to some random date in the past, but we want to preserve and conserve all the great stuff from our civilization and bring it forward into the future. What is it about this moment that we're in that is, what is the same that Buckley saw? How is it different? How are the challenges unique? And then how are we going to meet them?
Yeah, when William F. Buckley brought together that group of about 100 students, it was right in 1960. It was coming right at the end of, at that time, probably the most heavily contested presidential election, the most divisive time from a presidential election in American history back then. And we were, coming off the Korean War, going into the Vietnam War, really dicey times in terms of American culture, particularly on our college campuses. So that's consistent. We've seen it all throughout our time in college. We've seen it over the years. But I think what makes it different, I had plenty of left-wing professors, but today it's not just the left-wing professors that are a problem for our students. It's the activists. Right. It's the rebel rousers. It's the folks that come in and not only do they want to challenge you, they want to just wipe you out. And in many ways, this is something I'm accustomed to. I remember a decade ago, I can certainly relate, I like to point out that the Occupy movement did not start on Wall Street. It started on my street, Madison, Wisconsin.
That's right.
One of the best examples of the irony of the left, the absolute absurdity, was I remember around our state capitol in the midst of literally about 100,000 protesters occupying our capitol was a back of a car with a bumper sticker on one side that said coexist, those typical ones with the religious symbols, coexist, and right next to it was one that said recall Scott Walker. You just can't make this stuff up. But that's exactly what's happening today. It's on our campuses and in our culture. People are saying it's not enough to win the debate. They want to annihilate us. In my case, they want to recall me. They want to cancel us. They don't want conservatives to have any voice in society, and that's why we've got to push back.
Well, this, I think, actually brings up something that is very difficult to understand, but very important to the conservative movement, which is for people who know you, and for people who don't know you, by the way, you're a very nice guy. You're a very amiable, affable guy, that you almost forget that you faced one of the most intense political challenges of anybody in this country over the past couple of decades. You survived that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm excited that you'll be bringing that spine to YAF. But how do we balance that out? Because, part of me thinks I wish we could just get along, maybe not sing Kumbaya, but at least be able to go to a cocktail party with people on the left and make jokes about one another, make jokes about ourselves. But then part of me thinks that the left is so vicious right now, and they're destroying people, canceling people. They really seem to be out for blood. How are we supposed to position ourselves to fight back?
Well, it's the beauty at this time for YAF, and if folks want to learn more, they can go to yaf.org/longgame to see the kind of things we're talking about. But I think it's a combination of being strong. That's why going back to ideas, not just being focused on any one personality, but going back to ideas and making the case for ideas and how they change people's lives. Much of the last 4 years was a litmus test, particularly in the media, whether you were for the president or against the president, and there was no space in between on any of those issues. Of course, they were obviously very biased against President Trump throughout that time. But I think right now, it's built for a time for organizations such as Young America's Foundation, because we're focused on ideas. Yeah. Ron Robinson, not just going back to William F. Buckley, but Ron Robinson, who was president for more than 4 decades. Yeah. He jokes he's not a big guy for term limits, at least in his case. But he did a fabulous job of creating an organization that really offers quality information, including people like you speaking on campus and plenty of other your colleagues at the Daily Wire. But the kicker there is to take those big, bold ideas and then be aggressive in not changing what we do, but changing how many more people we reach. And that's where we have to be strong. That's where we have to fight back. Because the battle is not over winning and losing over ideas. We win on ideas if we have a level or close to level playing field. Right. Where we got to be strong, and what we do have to be willing to fight back is to say under no circumstances will we accept anyone violating our right to speak out freely, whether it's on a campus, whether it's in our culture in general, and particularly these days when it's speaking out on platforms like Twitter or Facebook or other things on social media.
But so I totally agree. If we're going to win, we're going to win on ideas and then translating those ideas into action. Yeah. It's something YAF's been doing for a long time, and I suspect will do even more so into the future. That's why you focus on education, that's why you focus on these lectures, that's why you focus on college campuses. But my fear is it too late when you get to college?
You're exactly right about that. So the long game, another key component is starting earlier. I think about, I was 12 years old when Ronald Reagan ran for president of the United States. Other than my parents, I don't think any other adult had a greater impact on me and many in my generation, not just as conservatives or even as Republicans, but as optimists. He had this eternal belief in the American people. He was a happy warrior. He was strong and bold, but he had this, this shining city on the hill type mindset. And I think that was very attractive, not only to those of us who were conservatives, but even some of the so-called Reagan Democrats back in the day. So I think it's important to do that. But I also think one of the big mistakes that we make is we think and talk with our head. The left thinks and talks with their heart. Yeah. We need to think with our head, but talk with our heart. And that's as you get to younger ages, you've got to, again, not concede the logic, but going into high school. And a part of our plan is to go aggressively into preteens, into middle school, junior high, and even start working not only with the students in elementary school, but with their parents as well, to give them the materials and the tools to teach them why America is exceptional, why this is a great country, because the left is trying to tell them how awful we are, and that couldn't be farther from the truth.
No, this is something that the left has done very, very well, and I detail it in my book, Speechless, which you very kindly have blurbed. And I always thought, especially as a college conservative, well, look, if we just win in debate club, if we just win, then people will change their minds. But when you're young, when you're more impressionable, you're really shaping your mind, you're shaping your worldview. That is why the left goes into high schools, middle schools, even elementary schools now, and they are telling a certain story. I mean, they're telling a vision of America that is the 1619 Project vision of America. It's a very different one than we have. Why have they been so successful at that? I mean, why have they beaten us on this
Well,
front?
for precisely what you talked about, we play by the old rules.
Yes, yeah.
And not that we shouldn't play by rules, because we're not going to stoop to some of the tactics they do, but we've got to play by our own set of rules going forward. And I'll give you two examples that tie a conference, the conference that you were part of.
Yeah.
So we had our first in-person event about a month ago in February down in Miami. You, of course, and Senator Cruz were down there doing part of the verdict on site. But part of the reason why we went and had that conference there was, one, because Florida's open. Thank you, Ron DeSantis, who I think is arguably the best governor in the country, just standing up, and I appreciate being a good governor, what an impact that can have.
You know a thing or two about
I hope
that
so,
subject.
Yeah. But I think he's done a fabulous job. So we picked Florida because it was open. But we picked Miami because of the story we wanted to tell. When you're that close to Cuba, we had not only speakers talk about their life experience coming from Cuba or their family coming from Cuba. One of our speakers had just come not that long ago from Venezuela. And I think that's a good example where, particularly with younger students and their families, again, not conceding the logic, but telling it from the heart. When you talk about, one of our speakers told me, his parents came to America through the Freedom Tower there in Miami, just blocks from where we were at. And part of the reason why they came was one of his uncles was a political prisoner under Castro's regime for 9 years, the other for 18.
Wow.
That's what socialism is about. It promises power to the people, but it really means poverty to the masses and power in the hands of the elite. We need to contrast those stories, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Cuba, whether it's the old communist bloc countries, or even what we're seeing in Hong Kong and China, particularly China these days. So that was one part of it. The other part is we've got this incredible tip line that's been capturing all these stories from across America. Many of them about really abusive and out of control professors, sometimes about free speech violations. But one of them goes to the heart of what you're saying, particularly about younger ages. And that was from our students at Iowa State. It wasn't even about the campus. It was about the local school district in Ames, Iowa. Not San Francisco, not New York City, Ames, Iowa, where the district teamed up with BLM to have a BLM week of action, first week of February for Black History Month. No problem with Black history. This had nothing to do with it. It was all about indoctrination. And they went from kindergarten to 12th grade. And with kindergartners, they literally gave them coloring pages of transgender people and told them that they could pick their sex, and went on through the curriculum throughout the grades to tell them things like fathers really didn't need to be a part of the family anymore. This is what the left is doing.
Yeah.
They're trying to normalize it. They're trying to rationalize it. We need to push back, and we need to do it sooner, and not hide out there and think somehow, like you said, we can wait till debate class in high school or even in college. That's too late for a lot of these folks. We got to start sooner. That's why the long game's so important.
Well, now as we enter the 375th day of 15 Days to Slow the Spread, we're hearing a lot of talk about the new normal. And I think it's just what you say. They're normalizing these things. Well, when you do something long enough, it just becomes normal. And so, you've seen this process build and build to the point that now you have transgender indoctrination in kindergartens and BLM training. And it reminds me of I think that what's so important about YAF is that you've got to state true things. You've got to state substantive things.
Right.
We defend free speech, we defend the free marketplace of ideas, we defend all these things in the abstract, but we also have something to say. We're also conveying a particular vision of the country, and I just think for far too long, conservatives seem to have been a little afraid of doing that.
Well, claim the high ground. We've got the facts on our side, we've got the substance on our side, and I would say we have fairness. We've just been afraid to talk about it. One of the things I talked about in my book, Unintimidated, was at the left, people like Barack Obama were so good at grabbing the fairness issue.
Yeah.
When I talk about, why is it that one of the best teachers in the state was one of the first to be laid off years before I was governor when they did cut aid to schools and gave them no tools, that's because the old union contract said the last in is the first out. The first fired, or the last hired, I should say, is the first fired. Well, most people would say that's just not fair.
Yeah.
But we didn't tell those stories. So we have to tell those stories. Again, it's why we picked Miami and why I keep encouraging students, go find people who started their own business from scratch. Go find people whose family came here from somewhere else legally and immigrated to this country. People forget we have over 1 million people every year who legally immigrate to the United States of America. And there's no other country even close to us when it comes to foreign-born citizens. Germany's the next closest country, and we're 4 times more citizens that were foreign-born than even Germany is. Why? Because people who come from other places love America. They want to be here. And we need to tell those stories because it's a great way to counter the crap that we're hearing from the left, from all these snowflakes out there who somehow believe this nonsense that we were, that they were born and raised in a country that was so god awful that they need to leave. Exactly. Right. When the fact of the matter is, this is one of the greatest countries in the history. Not one of. It is the greatest country in the history of the world, and it offers unbelievable opportunities for people. And we should be out telling our students how they can take advantage, in a good sense, of those opportunities, instead of trying to sell this bill of goods about how awful it is.
Right, the social currency of grievance. People tend not to flee toward oppression. That's not, fairly unusual.
Well, think about it. When I was a kid, so Cuba, I mentioned before, I can still remember those images of people passing over shark-infested waters. Literally with rafts that were barely floating above the water, piles of people on top. Why? Because they knew of the freedom and opportunity available uniquely in the United States of America. They weren't going the other way. They weren't trying to find their way into Cuba. And I think that's a telltale. But we have to be strong enough to stand up and say, yeah, we're not only going to give the substance and the facts, we're going to tell it with the emotion that ties into that, and we're going to claim the high ground when it comes to fairness.
Now, speaking of oppressors, I do have to get back to something that you just said, which reminded me, I think you could give some advice to conservatives now about one issue in particular, the teacher unions. The teacher unions, nobody has stood up to teacher unions like you stood up to them. They are keeping our schools closed for no reason other than their own laziness, their own desire to make money for doing nothing, their own desire not to listen to their own members, teachers who want to actually get back and teach the students. And it seems like there is not a thing that we can do about it.
Well, we can hold our elected officials accountable, because that's really what it's about. It's not about the teachers. Like you say, 2 of my wife's best friends are teachers. They have had it with Zoom. They want to see their, one in particular teaches kindergarten. She's pulling her hair out trying to connect with kids, over Zoom as opposed to being in person. The frontline teachers, the people that love their kids, that want to make sure they get the best education possible, they want to be in the classroom. They're the same people that don't want to be a part of an oppressive union to begin with. But it's got to be a clear message, has to be delivered all the way up to Joe Biden, that the teachers' union bosses don't run America. The American people do. And the unions need to know that you're not an essential worker if you can't show up when it's essential. I've got my brother and my sister-in-law, for example. My brother is a manager at one of the convenience store chains in Wisconsin. My sister-in-law has been selling appliances since the first 15 days after that passed. She was back at the store. They are both frontline workers who've been working for the past year, and it just drives them crazy and every other parent like them that their kids can't go back to school full time. Now, they've eased into it, unlike some places, across the country in New York and elsewhere. They haven't even been back at all in a year. This is unconscionable. About the few times I've ever agreed with the mayor of Chicago has been the last few months, when she stood up and said, particularly pointed out that young men and women that look like her, that live in some of the most impoverished neighborhoods in Chicago, and for that matter elsewhere across the country, are being the most hurt, the most damaged by not being able to physically be in the classroom. This should be not just an economic and practical issue, this should be a moral issue. And it's about time people across America stood up and held elected officials accountable for why they're not letting our kids go back to school.
When we find ourselves agreeing with Chicago's Lori Lightfoot, something has gone seriously wrong in politics. And you bring up another issue, I think, that is kind of at the heart of this long game, of the vision for the future of conservatism, which is, I hear from my liberal friends, they say, Michael, look, the lockdown, it doesn't matter. You can just Zoom to work. You stay at home. You Zoom into your consulting job. You're probably going to end up making more money, frankly. And I think, do you realize how out of touch you are with the majority of Americans? And this is something that has changed in my lifetime. When I was a kid, I say this totally, I am a Republican since the time I registered. But the Republican Party was the party of rich people, and that's just the way it was. And the Democratic Party was the party of the working class. And that just is not the case. It totally flipped. How did it flip? How do we maintain that into the future?
Well, a couple of weeks ago, we were kidding before we went on set here that there was, thinking about the royal family, but everybody thinks the big interview on CBS that night was, with with Meghan and Harry, I think it was a half an hour before. 60 Minutes had an interview with a series of people who, some of whom are now homeless, who have been the forgotten men and women of the pandemic. Now, they didn't connect the dots. They showed you the tragic side of it, which was tragic. A woman, pregnant woman, living in a tent in the middle of Columbus, Ohio. Some other stories like that along the way. Just, I didn't watch the royal stuff, but the other stuff was really disappointing for anyone thinking about people living in America. But what they didn't connect the dots on is people like that woman that was interviewed were living in a tent after having built up credit, opportunity before all the pandemic, because too many of our politicians across this country have shut this country down.
Yeah.
And that's where I hope, not only from YF's standpoint, but just in general, when people look at the difference between the left and the right, when they look at states like Florida and Texas versus New York and California, when they look at cities that are open versus those that are not, I think it's very clear. If you're a blue-collar worker, if you're a family like my brothers, you have no choice.
Yeah.
You have to show up. And this is what's interesting. For all the talk about race and sex and equality versus equity, I mean, it's really interesting that the bottom line, if you listen to the American people, is the people that have to show up every single day or they don't get a paycheck have had it with the people, the politicians who want to shut things down.
Right. Well, you know, the more
folks who Zoom to work every day, God bless them, there's a lot of good people there too, but they're somewhat oblivious to the challenges out there because their kids can be in the other room on one of their other laptops. You know, my brother, thankfully, his youngest is just 13, but if she was 5, 6 years younger, what would they do?
Right.
What would they do? And that's the America, not just politically speaking, but I think that goes back to part of our goal at the long game, is to reach out and get to those families, get to those students sooner, because it is disproportionately women in the workforce and people of color in the workforce who have been the most hurt by the shutdowns. I think there's tremendous opportunities for us to grow in those families with their sons and daughters to say, we're the ones who believe in you, they're the ones who believe in the government.
Right.
When you can't even yell, when the bureaucrats in California claim that Disneyland can be open, but you can't scream on a ride, that shows the sheer stupidity of the government mentality.
Just going down, just sort of totally straight face, hands in the air.
Yeah.
Sort of, you've just reminded me. This actually hadn't really occurred to me until you said it. All this talk of racial justice and equity and sexual whatever does seem to be a little bit of a cover for a liberal elite establishment saying, keep giving your money to billionaires in Silicon Valley who hate your values. Keep ordering from that one company that hates your value. And you think, it seems like a bunch of BS. It's a cover for a very corrupt establishment.
Well, really, and it goes back to this Marxist view of the world. We've had a number of our speakers, some really engaging folks who've spoke to our students through IF programs, and many more that will come. We'll talk about things like critical race theory and that. And you can go all the way back to saying many generations ago, Marxists tried to impose their will here in the United States, and it didn't work. Why? Because we're not a class-based society. In America, you can grow up the poorest of the poor, and you can be president, you can be CEO, you can be whatever your heart desires to be, because the opportunities are boundless to the American people. It's up to hard work and determination and hopefully access to a decent education, some skills. So what did they do? Well, I think they're cycling back, trying to create another set of class battles to impose a different form of Marxism. In this case, it's not economically based. It's based on race and gender and sexual preference and things of that nature.
And culture.
Instead, I mean, in driving the culture, the easiest answer to all these different challenges we faced, particularly over the last year, is respect. If we teach people, particularly if we go back to what the Bible teaches us and our Judeo-Christian values in this country, about teaching people if you want to be treated the way that or you want to treat someone else the way you would like to be treated and vice versa. If we live by those principles, if we respect our fellow citizens, if we say we love America and we want our children and our family to do well, but we also want you and your family to do well, things would get much better. Instead, we've got these leftists, and I would say not just not liberals, but radicals, who somehow think they should determine what we think and how we think. and they put their faith in the government because they want the power in the hands of the few. We want it in the masses.
You know, Governor, you know that I'm very jazzed on this topic, having just written a book on this topic, but I guess this is what's gotten me so excited about the long game is, as you say, you have these Marxists at the end of the 19th and early 20th century, and the revolution rather, doesn't happen. And this is because, as Antonio Gramsci says, the Italian communist theorist, he says that the conservatives have cultural hegemony, and the left doesn't have it. And then this develops into critical theory. There are groups like the Frankfurt School, all these various sorts of intellectuals who I think we should take seriously. If you're gonna fight them. But then that gets reformulated in the 60s by the student radical Rudi Deutschke, who is reading Gramsci, and he says, we need a long march through the institutions. And we're now seeing the fruits of that. Just as you were describing, these radicals who have gained position in all of these institutions. And so one day we look up and we say, oh my gosh, they've got all these positions of power. And the minute I saw the cover here, the name of the long game, I said, oh, finally, a conservative is wising up to what's been going on.
And the beauty of this is we're not imposing some foreign concept.
Yeah.
Our long game is to bring back the very founding principles,
right?
To put in place what our country was based on and what has allowed our people, the people from so many generations, again, those who were born here and those that came here from elsewhere around the world, to thrive. Those founding principles have succeeded generation after generation. Sadly, we let them slip away. In part because we took it for granted that it would just be that way.
Yeah.
And instead, as you aptly just pointed out, the left has had a long-term plan as well. This didn't happen overnight.
Right.
This was a long-term plan, and undoing it is going to take more than a news cycle. It's probably going to take even more than a presidential cycle. It really is going to take the long game. And we're not going to do it alone. Yeah. Young America's Foundation, we're excited. We've got big plans. We hope people will go and check it out and send, if they've got sons or daughters, nieces or nephews, grandsons, granddaughters. If you're a student listening, come and join us right here. We'd love to have you be a part of our programs or support us as part of our efforts. But we're going to have to partner with others.
Yes.
This is something the left is really good at doing. They get together lockstep. We're not talking about being lockstep, but we're saying join us together, not just as one organization, but as a movement that believes not just conservative versus liberal, that believes in the founding principles that made this country great and will make it even greater going forward. Join us in that effort.
I think this is the key, because the late conservative philosopher Roger Scruton, he had this observation, which is that it's very easy to destroy. It's very difficult to build. And going back, we just mentioned critical theory. Critical theory is a very complicated topic, but it basically boils down to the theory to criticize. It goes back to what Marx said in a letter to Arnold Ruja, I think, where he said that we must embark on the ruthless criticism of all that exists. And you've seen this for decades, this criticism to tear down America, to tear down what the country stands for, to tear down our institutions. And we don't want to do that. We want to build it back up. We want to recover something that's been lost, conserve what is here. And we can't do that alone. And so I just love that YAF has this big, bold vision and an organization in place that has a pretty good track record on accomplishing these things.
Yeah, that's the nice thing. I mean, this goes all the way back 6 decades. It's got nationwide roots. But again, we can't do it alone, and what we do well, and that's a testament to Ron Robinson, the board, supporters, great staff, and most specifically some wonderful students. You think of people like Katie Pavlich, who came to the Reagan Ranch, not knowing at all what she was going to do, and was totally transformed by our speakers at that session. That's why we want to add 1 million more students to our programs along the way. When you think of our conferences that you've been keynoted at and done your podcast at and other events, I think of someone like Peter Schweitzer, the obviously best-selling author who does I think better research than anyone at least on the conservative side of looking into the facts and things. Peter came to one of our national conservative student conferences and again, transformed where he's at. So we want to set a record number of conferences going forward and provide even more access to student speakers and online and YouTube, which you're a big part of. We'd love to have 5 million subscribers to our YouTube page and 1 billion, with a B, 1 billion views when it's going forward out there. We want to be on every campus. And we want to go, when you talk about the working class, not just on undergraduate. I'd like to get into 2-year associate degree programs because those are really practical students who want to get right into the workforce. all those things we can do, but it's going to take partnerships and it's going to take working together. And it's not just that we can do it, we have to.
Right.
There's just too much at stake. And if we're going to beat the left, we've got to be engaged in every one of these areas and some to make the difference over the next few years, to save the heart and soul of our republic.
And I'm excited in the short run. I'm even more excited for the long game. You can go to yaf.org/long game. It's going to be terrific. You can catch me speaking at the University of Hawaii. I just want to get this on the table now. The University of Hawaii would be great, but at places all around the country. Governor, thank you so much. You know, Bill Buckley obviously did so much great work, and YAF was founded. Ron Robinson did so much great work, and I know that just like America's best days are to come, I have great hope and confidence that the conservative movement's best days are to come, and specifically with the leadership of you and YAF.
Amen. Let's do it.
All right, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.